Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So, the last day of 2020 and a time for looking back before we plunge headlong into 2021. And initially, I'm going to take a look at the blonde buffoon. So, 2020 was a pretty bad year for Boris Johnson's leadership, really, all things considered. Conservative MPs already knew that he was a weak leader before they promoted him, but they didn't think he'd have to deal with any real problems. Then COVID happened. But he ended the year on a high with his Brexit deal, and his stock in the Conservative Party may have risen as a result. But is it enough to keep him in post for much longer into the next year? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Boris Johnson is on a bit of a high at the moment, no doubt about that. Yes, there are Brexiteers who are a little bit mad at him, particularly in the fishing industry. I suppose a lot of other industries as well that bought the lies, for selling out on the deal because they believe the unicorns. Now, for some of them, just the fact that he arranged any deal is a betrayal because they were so convinced that no deal Brexit was the truest, purest form of Brexit and that what they got was a Brino, Brexit in name only. For others, they were fine with the principle of a deal. Of course, we want a deal, but not one that favoured the EU. Again, Boris Johnson's frequent use of the term sovereign equals when we're not at all. But by and large, these attacks on the deal are not coming from particularly influential people on the Brexit side. The mainstream media has not yet turned against the deal. Nigel Farage has supported it. The Conservative Party opposition is currently muted. The hardline ERG are trying to claim that this deal meets their sovereignty tests, which, if they applied those same tests to EU membership, would also be met. Only 2 Conservative MPs, I believe, failed to vote in support of the deal this week. I think 1 abstained and 1 against. But all the others voted for it. Johnson folded on all of the outstanding issues at the last minute, sold his deal as a victory in the UK, as we suspected he would. And you know what? As we suspected, people bought it. Another triumph for Boris Johnson's brand of mindless optimism and lies and populism. Exactly why the Conservatives made him their leader. However, and it's a big however, the failure to deal with absolutely everything else this year has been nothing short of catastrophic for the Conservatives. I'll be interested to see how the polls work over the coming days even, but weeks and months, because the last one I saw was just before the deal was agreed, where it was really bad. So at the start of December, there was a poll on YouGov and it looked like the Conservatives had gained a bit of ground. But then we had the French port closures. The Conservatives tanked in the polls after that. Now I expect a bounce because of the Brexit deal. But then tomorrow, the realities of Brexit will hit. So I suppose it depends when the poll takes place. Now, look at the way Boris Johnson has managed the coronavirus pandemic as an obvious but not exclusive example. But the big one of 2020, he got everything wrong. He acted too slowly, and as a result, the UK suffered amongst the worst effects, both in terms of deaths and economic damage in the developed world. And if you take the combination of the two things, arguably we've done the worst of all advanced nations. The pandemic has so far killed more than 1 person in 1,000 in the UK. Just that so far. That's more even than in the United States, who were led by a guy who considered the use of bleach as a cure. And we may not have even experienced the worst phase of the COVID pandemic yet. Even with the vaccine, I know we've got the vaccine, but it's still to be rolled out. And that rollout is going rather slowly. It's actually, ironically, not helped by the incidence of COVID in this country. We've just approved the Oxford vaccine, so we've got 2 now approved, but we're delaying using that. The approval was yesterday, I believe, and yet we're still not going to be using even the first dose until Monday, and that's already in the country, already there, it's ready to use. And it wasn't a sudden surprise when it was given clearance to be used. I mean, I don't understand that. And what's more, we're apparently only going to use about 500,000 doses of it in the whole of January. Well, the government were talking about vaccinating 2 million people a week. That seems to have been scaled back quickly. Johnson has also failed with the public relations part of COVID. Now, for Conservatives, this will actually be the greatest crime. There will be varying levels of genuine concern about the devastating impact of his mismanagement over COVID. But what's more important to them is how it's seen. If the people are fooled by his excuses, well, then all is well. Some Conservative MPs may not be that happy, but they'll just take, the greater good line. I'm still going to win my seat in the next election. Not that bothered, really. What's done is done. Let's just hope he gets it better next time. But that's not what happened. He kept covering for people who are close to him and breaking the rules and messing up left, right and centre. He's lost the public trust. His personal approval rating is lower than that of the Labour leader, and the gap between the Conservatives and Labour closed right down. Now, at the time I'm recording this, Labour are actually ahead because the Conservatives didn't half get a walloping as a result of those delays when the French had to close their ports. I mean, it'll seesaw. Like I said, I'd expect a bounce for the Conservatives due to the Brexit deal. It'll go up above then. But then you think, so in 2021, there's going to be more cock-ups. Every time there's a big cock-up that's massively mismanaged, they'll take a hit in the polls. But the problem is, I don't really see where their wins are coming from. They'll have a few more COVID wins in 2021, but I don't really see where they're going to come from long term. But we know long term Boris Johnson's going to keep messing everything up. At some point, COVID will go away as a serious threat. It is to be hoped long before the next general election. But what 2020 showed us is both the best and the worst from Boris Johnson. The best is that he can sell a big lie to the nation. He showed that in the Brexit referendum in 2016, he can sell a lie. He showed it in the general election of 2019, and he's shown it again with his Brexit deal in 2020. He hasn't delivered what was promised, which got him that support in the first place. But his supporters are still happy. They ordered the prime rib, they got a Big Mac, they're still delighted. But the worst is that he's absolutely hopeless with a real issue with real consequences. And there are at least two real issues coming up for the Conservatives. And that is assuming that we don't get any more surprises. It's quite likely we're going to get some surprises over the next few years. The first issue is Brexit, obviously. From tomorrow, we will face delays at the border again due to checks on goods. Now, the government aim to reduce those delays by not checking stuff coming into the UK. Checks will still take place going out, but France have got their system set up. So the fact that the French have got a system set up and we're not going to use a system at all, they're hoping that the delays will be kept down. But there will be delays. There has to be delays. We've got to deal with the EU, but they're not going to go soft on us. Businesses will also face extra costs in trading, and this will cause some of them to collapse. The service sector will face particularly hard times, and again, some of those businesses will not weather the storm. We're not talking about half of British businesses folding or anything like that, but it is going to be enough to cause significantly higher unemployment at a time when there's already large numbers of people having to access unemployment benefits for the first time in their lives. Johnson intended that COVID hide much of the impact of Brexit, but the combination of the two disasters is more likely to create a perfect storm, because the sort of businesses most hit by COVID are not the same ones most hit by Brexit. So what you're actually going to have is all sectors of the economy hit by one or the other in 2021. And under normal circumstances, I would think, well, the government will be aware of this and therefore must have a plan to deal with it. But this is Boris Johnson we're talking about here. It's not even like he's got enough brains in his cabinet to do the thinking for him. I saw a Brexit observer, David Hennig, saying that what Boris Johnson desperately needs to do in 2021 is to keep politics away from the real world. I agree with this. Brexit cannot survive contact with the real world. And so Boris Johnson needs to stop people linking the two. Real consequences with Brexit. He's got to keep them separate. And he knows that as well. And I know he knows that as well, because do you remember early in the year when he forbade civil servants from even mentioning the word Brexit after the end of January? And how he abolished the Brexit department, more properly known as the Department for Exiting the European Union, at the time when it was most needed. This was because he was fully aware that people must not tie the consequences of Brexit to reality in 2021. He must convince us that Brexit was done on January the 31st, 2020, and anything that happens in 2021 onwards is down to something else, because Brexit was done ages ago and then nothing happened. Do you remember how nothing happened? So anything else is not Brexit. His second major problem is his promise to level up neglected parts of the country, which they're still calling neglected by Labour, even though they've been in power for the last 10.5 years. But anyway, for electoral purposes, this will mostly mean the north of England. He will continue to ignore Scotland, I fear, which of course only plays into the hands of the SNP, those who want independence for Scotland in general, whose numbers will grow. I don't know whether Boris Johnson realises this or whether he just doesn't care, but it is clear that the calculation is as follows. Even in the good times, we don't win many Scottish seats, but we have shown that we can win seats under the right circumstances in the north of England. So that's where we'll focus. We'll put our money there, and he's got no more sophisticated thought than that. But of course, Boris Johnson will not actually improve infrastructure in the north of England. Even if he did pour money into these levelling up projects, which would be interesting given our current economic situation, but then we do print our own money, I suppose, so he might. But even if he did, not much of it would end up being noticed up here. There have already been some levelling up projects scaled back for the north of England. There will be a few projects, I've no doubt, that don't particularly improve lives for people, just a big white elephant just to say, look, we did that. He'll say he's delivered on his promise, just like with the Brexit deal. After all, look at how he spent money on the COVID response. Absolutely pumped money in. Nobody would criticise him for not spending enough. No, he hasn't been tight. The problem is where he spent it. Didn't spend it on the right things. Lots of it went to waste. Complete waste. The same will happen here. He'll spend the money on contracts for people with ties to the Conservatives and not the ability to deliver the project in the best way. Come the 2024 general election, I have absolutely no doubts that he'll boast about the money spent on the north. He'll reel off a list of projects that don't really do any good for anyone. But the people will just look around and go, well, where's all this investment then? Because I haven't seen the benefit, I have to say. And that's what we need to remember about, like, say, 2019. Boris Johnson didn't win a landslide election victory in the normal democratic sense. He won a large number of seats, first past the post, but with only 43% of the popular vote. The way he did this is he won a lot of extra seats by a very small number of votes. Quite small number of votes. Then you look at the reason for that. One, he convinced some people to vote Conservative to get Brexit done. Those people may question their purchase in 2024 when not only is it not done, because they'll still be talking about it, because there'll be some negotiation still going on, but there'll be no tangible benefits to them. Two, millions of Labour voters, nearly 3 million Labour voters, just didn't vote at all. They didn't want to vote for anyone else, wouldn't vote for Labour because of dissatisfaction with the then Labour leader. Now, in a few years' time, if that is no longer the case in 2024, then those votes may well return to Labour. Decent chance they will. Conservative MPs will be painfully aware of this. I'm not saying anything they don't already know or aren't already talking about. Boris Johnson isn't going to magically change overnight. He's not going to have grown as a person. He's still incompetent. He's still packed his cabinet with incompetent toadies. I mean, that potentially could change. He's already made life worse for the very people whose votes the Conservatives are going to depend upon in 2024. So I don't see how the bonhomie that Johnson may be experiencing right now survives very long into 2021. He's having a good patch right now. Not really sure how long that can last. The reasonable worst case scenario of Brexit is still coming. We won't handle it well. It's going to be difficult enough for any government to handle. We know we won't handle it well because they've handled nothing well. There's increasing pressure on the NHS, which the vaccine will not deal with for some time. And there's more unemployment to come. I would still say I really cannot see Boris Johnson being in place at summer, unless, of course, Labour really do tear themselves apart. If Labour keep the pressure on Boris Johnson as they've done in 2020, going into 2021, how can he not be gone? What kept him in place this year was Brexit, getting the Brexit deal. What is there to keep him in place in 2021? What do the Conservatives need him for in 2021? The only way he can stay is if he reverses their fortunes in the polls, or at least gives them the confidence that they'll be in a good place for the next general election. But if he keeps cocking things up, and he will keep cocking things up, he's gone. Got to be. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.